We are continuing with the program, and as you know, we were asking all our speakers to share some fun fact about them, and I'm sure that this is maybe even the funniest fun fact, because our next speaker, Alex, he once rode a cow on a rave party. So yeah. Alex will talk about how your startup can outposition market leaders. So please, one mega big round of applause for Alex.
Are we going here? Oh, hang on. Skipped a couple of slides here. Hi, so I'm Alex. I'm a startup copywriter. I work with more than 100 startups and a few global technology brands. I'm here today to present essentially to explain how your startup can outposition market leaders. There's a couple of big problems with a lot of the design teams that I've worked with that often limit the ability of startups to stand out in a crowded marketplace and make their ideas stand out. I want to tackle those problems and explain how you can help your startup to stand out in a crowded marketplace. This will help you to write a better homepage, to help position your brand and products, and to add features that your customers actually want and are willing to pay money for. So it's a bit of a background. I've worked in sales and marketing for around 14 years. I spent 6 years in enterprise sales, shifted into marketing 8 years ago, and I've spent the last 5 years working exclusively on homepages for startups. So at the top level here, the first problem we come up against is a lot of startups, particularly if they're design-led, tend to copy the positioning strategies and messaging strategies used by global brands. We often hear designers say things like, we've looked at Stripe, we've looked at Apple for inspiration. This is a really big mistake. So the first thing I want to do is tackle a really fairly existential question, which actually a lot of marketers struggle with, which is, what should a homepage do in the first place? People often say a homepage is there to convert visitors. That's actually not true. If we look at a sales page, for example, if I'm running a Google ad or a Facebook ad, that's very conversion focused. If we look at a typical, just to pull up a standard funnel that you've probably seen a million times, when people land on a homepage, they could be discovering your brand for the first time. They could be ready to convert, so we need to have some sort of an experience ready that speaks to people at each different stage. So if I'm working with a new startup, there's a few consultative questions I tend to ask. You know, we essentially want to work out what's the market status quo? What do most of your customers do right now? What are the products and the solutions they're using? One important point to remember as well is a lot of the time they're not using competing SaaS products. They might be using Excel, they might be using WhatsApp. In fact, in most cases, they're using a free product. So we can walk through, we can ask people standard consultative questions. What do your customers do right now? Why does that suck? What does that suck look and feel like? And how does it feel? And what are both the business impact and the feelings they have when they engage with your product? So one of the questions I like to ask when we talk about the difference between positioning for startups versus established brands, it's very simple. What percentage of customers land on your website and already know why your brand exists? So how many people do you think land on Nike's website and don't know that Nike sell basketball shoes and running equipment? Probably less than 1%. The same for Apple, for example, selling consumer electronics. Yet if you're running a startup, it could be less than 1% of people are landing on your website with a clear pre-existing idea about your brand, your values, and your product. So it's pretty clear that we need a different messaging strategy for your startup. So taking a really cliche example here, even if we take Apple back in 2006, if you remember they're riding high on the success of the iPod, we all knew some kind of phone-based product was coming. We knew that this product, Apple being Apple, would probably have a different user interface. Even with all of that existing massive collateral and brand awareness there, the way that Steve introduced the iPhone was to refer to 3 pre-existing products. So a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. Now, the first thing to observe is this is not a sexy pitch. This is not minimalist. It's not evocative. Most designers, if I handed this to them, would throw it in the bin. I actually use a similar positioning tactic here for Previsio. Previsio is a driving safety platform. They've just teamed up with Jaguar Land Rover and are hoping to eliminate road traffic deaths within the next 2 decades. So I use seatbelts as a positioning strategy there. We want to explain how our technology product has changed or is going to change the driving safety scene. So I use a pre-existing established product to position it. They actually use this as part of their presentation to get nominated for KPMG Business Awards. Yeah, no worries. It was a drum and bass rave. It was about 20 years ago. It was a really good rave. You have to ask me in person for me to give you the details. I don't want that on camera. So this was a positioning tactic I used here, using a pre-existing product to contextualize a genuinely 0 to 1 product. So if I was hired today to write a hero section, the top section of a homepage, if the iPhone was launched in the year 2025, I might write something like this: every album on the internet at your fingertips. So I'm alluding to the high capacity of music that it holds, the internet browsing experience, and the, at the time, revolutionary touchscreen interface. We've got the use cases or features as 3 ticks underneath. Again, most designers would throw a fit if I sent this to them. It's not sexy, it's not evocative at all. Nonetheless, but if we look at the iPhone 16 Pro, 16 generations in, you can see why designers like to do this. We look at the iPhone now today, they're able to sell the iPhone 16 Pro purely on the basis of Apple Intelligence. The fact this feature has since collapsed is another discussion. The 15 Pro is sold basically on the fact that it has a titanium body. Now, Apple can get away with this because Apple knows that we all understand deeply where an iPhone sits in our lives. You could ask your grandparents, can you list me 3 things you can do with an iPhone? And they could tell you it can take pictures, you can browse the internet. The iPhone has an absolutely phenomenal amount of brand awareness and product awareness. This is completely irrelevant to your startup that most people haven't heard of. Nonetheless, if we take several recent examples of hero sections that the design community thought were cooking, I think is the expression, we have here your trusted companion. So one of the golden rules I use for headlines is if I could copy-paste the headline onto somebody else's product, it probably sucks. Same not just for page headlines, but for section headlines as well. So in this case, your trusted companion tells me absolutely nothing about the problem, about the product, about the audience. If this was a brand new product, the first ever crypto wallet that had come to market, it would be a poor headline because it doesn't tell me how it works. We're competing in a crowded marketplace against hundreds of crypto wallets. The game here should be differentiation. There is nothing here to differentiate this product at all. This was a really popular hero section because of the typography, because of the minimalist design. I have absolutely no idea what kind of problem Beam solves. I'm told it's a new way to use my computer. Cool, what's the problem with my existing computer right now? Where is the pain point that you're solving? I have no idea to this day, even having scanned the whole page, what this product does or how it can improve my life. Finally here, this hero section at least names the product category. I know it's wearable AI, that's helpful. Beyond that, I have no idea that apart from the fact that it goes beyond my mind's limitations. Again, complete fail. We finally here have a homepage for Slack, and it tells us where work happens. The interesting thing with global brands is the bigger a company gets, the less important the homepage becomes. They have a huge amount of conversion architecture. They've got countless different paid traffic campaigns. The amount of people they convert via their homepage actually becomes very small. So in many ways, a global technology brand is one of the last examples you should pick for an example of a startup homepage strategy. But as a fun little exercise, what I'm going to do is to walk through how I might position Slack today if they're a brand new product. So the first thing I might do is simply to tell people what Slack can do. So we understand we can talk to our colleagues, integrate files, and integrate our enterprise apps and get updates. So we might come up with talk to your team and share files with a click. Now, Slack were first product into the marketplace. I think this is a pretty solid start. We understand what the product does and the impact that it might have. The problem is that Slack are competing in a crowded marketplace. Any of us could name tens of products that do the exact same thing. So once you're in a crowded marketplace, essentially the game shifts to differentiation. And for 90%, 95% of people who are here, if there was one word you took out of this talk, it would be differentiation. Your game is probably to differentiate your product against your competition. So when I'm writing, I always like to visualize my prospects have 10 internet tabs up for competing products. I'm one of them. I need to give them as many reasons as possible to close those other tabs until ours is the only one left standing. So what I'm going to do next is apply that famous piece of marketing advice, which is to sell with benefits. So what is the benefit of these features? In this case, we might say it's to accelerate collaboration across our workspace. And we come up with accelerate collaboration across your workplace. We call this benefit-based selling or outcome-based selling. The problem is benefit-based selling is absolute bullshit. It's a terrible way to sell a product. I have absolutely no idea when I look at this if this is a CRM, if it's a file sharing platform. We have, for example, headlines on a lot of SaaS products now that say things like 10x your ROI or 10x your sales with absolutely no idea what kind of product category they're even competing in. So the next thing we might do is to take the existing famous features and benefits framework and introduce a third element that sits in between, which is abilities. So we're going to take our product features, we're going to list the abilities that each feature enables, and then list the benefits after that. But for startups, I'm going to recommend we use the ability to place the headline. So now we have track updates for every project and app in one place. So that's an ability-focused headline. We then shift the benefits down as the explainer, and we prove the ability to do these things with 3 feature ticks underneath, 3 key product features. This is a fairly solid foundation for a hero section. The problem is it's still based a lot on assumption. I've essentially just sat down as a marketer, used a few positioning frameworks, but I've not actually spoken to any customers. The first thing that people normally do is suggest we come up with customer personas. The problem is this is also bullshit. I don't want anybody to ever sit down again in a room with a pot of coffee and talk about Larry the lawyer or Accounting Annie and just spitball and imagine what these people do. This is a completely worthless exercise. Thank you. That's the end of the talk. No, this is a really great book. It's actually out of print, but Jennifer's kindly said if anybody would like a free PDF copy, to just drop me a quick message. I've got my contact details at the end, and you can get a free PDF copy. Every high-level copywriter I know uses this book. It's fantastic. But the main takeaway from this book is we have 6 questions here that essentially relate to the struggle, so the pain point that our customers were experiencing that led them to explore and try and find a product. The solution, so what's the use case? What do people actually want to do with our product? And you'd be surprised how often startups actually get this wrong. The hesitation, so what did our customers worry about before switching to our product? And that gives us a clue as to some of the reasons that people aren't buying our product today. The awareness levels, so how aware they are of of solutions in the market today, the reasons they chose our product, and finally the wins, both in terms of business impact, but also emotions and feelings when they solve their problem. So when I'm working with my customers, I typically do 2 things. I might do surveys for upwards of 500 to 1,000 customers. The great thing is AI has enabled us to do sentiment analysis at scale. 3 years ago, I had to sit down and spend 3 days counting out keywords and spreadsheets. Thankfully, that's now no longer the case. And then I might pick out, say, 15 or 20 key customers that are particularly high value, the kind of customers we'd like to get more of, very high-level enterprise customers. Repeat that process using interviews where we tend to get more depth. And finally, a tactic that's really helpful if you have a product that doesn't actually have a lot of customers yet, which is review scraping. So if you're a B2B SaaS, you might go to Captera, you might go to G2, use various different tactics that may or may not be fully legal, but people do them anyway, to scrape thousands and thousands of customer reviews and find out what kind of things piss people off about the biggest products in our market, so we can use those as angles to present our product as being a better alternative. So the first thing I've done here is to scrape a large number of G2 reviews for Slack. So what I've done here is use ChatGPT. You can use any of the major AI platforms. And I've filtered out the keywords, the emotional keywords, which are really helpful for the copywriting process, and the top themes as well. Now I've used these to write what we call a pain point section. You'll note Stripe, Apple don't have pain points. They don't need to do this. For your startup, it's very helpful to have a pain point section directly underneath the hero. What I typically do is pick 3 sub-pain points. As you can see here, team communication, finding the right files, and also having an overloaded inbox, and summarize those with 1 macro pain point. You only need one of those minor pain points to hit home with your customers to pique their engagement enough that they're probably going to read the rest of the homepage. The next thing I've done is to rank for top solutions, again, by keywords and themes. What I'm able to do with this is to go back to those feature ticks. We can take what were dry, objective features, flesh those out with much more humanistic language. So we've converted those into create a channel for any team or project, chat and share files with a click, get every app notification in one place. So we're using our customers' language there to really enrich dry features and make them more relatable. We then have hesitations. So anyone from a sales background here knows that risk mitigation is a major part of salesmanship, understanding why people are worried about switching to our product. So if you understand, for example, that people might think your product's expensive, you can focus more on enhancing the value proposition. If people are worried about data security, you can talk about the fact that you've got secure hosting in their choice of particular platform. If they're worried about it being difficult to use, you can reassure them that you've got insight training or just a great user interface. If you don't know why people aren't worried about using your product, it's very hard to do this. So I highly recommend building this into your interview process as well. And what I've done here is I've switched these worries and concerns into positives. So we understand here that people are most worried about information overload, it being overwhelming and difficult to manage and organize channels and messages. What I've done instead is position Slack as being a solution to this. Slack helps you to stay focused, and in just 3 steps, you can create channels for teams and projects and only get notifications of things that matter. So if you know why people are worried about switching to your product, you can instead switch those worries into positive, warm feelings instead. This is a great tactic for improving conversions. The awareness section was a bit more difficult because we're dealing with a hyper-mature product, so we'll skip that. We then come to differentiators. So this is an absolute gift of angles for your product. If you understand why people chose your product over competing products, that gives you an amazing set of angles that you can use for any of your marketing and advertising. And finally, we have again the wins that people have experienced. And I've broken these down into business wins, such as team collaboration and increased productivity, but also emotional, so feeling a connection with members, reduce stress. One of the examples I like to use here is I work with one of North America's top real estate SaaS platforms. We had all sorts of angles involving ROI and selling more houses. But when we spoke to their reps, we heard the same story from several of them, which is they used to worry about working all weekend, not spending time with their families. And once they switched to our app, which replaced 5 or 6 apps, they got to leave work early on a Friday afternoon. So we ran with the angle, get your weekends back. We told people that by using our app, they could actually spend more time with their families. Any kind of sales angle where you talk about improving people's lives at home is always going to blow any kind of business or ROI-based argument out of the water. The next thing we need to do, though, is remember we're not working in a vacuum here. We have to understand how our competition stack up. We're competing in a crowded marketplace. So what I did was I pulled the same analysis on Microsoft Teams. And the problem we have here is that we've got 2 mature products that have got almost complete feature parity. So I had to try a new tactic here. I went and looked through a lot of online reviews. And I found that one study found that Slack users were twice as likely to engage on mobile versus Microsoft Teams users. So this is a differentiation tactic I'm using here. So remember, we started with where work happens. And we've ended up with Teams work faster once they switch to Slack. So that single data point, that single fact gives us a headline that differentiates Slack against a product that has otherwise complete feature parity. And again, we've got the benefits in the explainer underneath, and the features enhanced with use cases underneath that too as well. But this goes beyond marketing. So a lot of the time I'm hired in initially to position new products. and to get more sales, but often I end up working with marketing teams as a result of this process. Product teams. My client James here, who's doing low 7 figures ARR with his podcast analytics platform, found that actually when we spoke to his customers, the reasons why they like his product and value it was slightly different to the ones he had in mind. And as a result of our customer interviews, he's actually had to change his product roadmap and the direction of his product slightly. So the second issue that I come up against, which comes outside of marketing and shifts more into product, is what I call features and benefits trench warfare. So one of the biggest red flags to look for in a startup is if you find yourself chasing after features in 360 degrees, you're chasing after every single competitor in your space, you're trying to copy their product roadmap, this is a really dangerous game to get into. It tends to lead to an extremely bloated product, really expensive development, and it makes marketing really, really tough to do as well. What your startup needs is a North Star, a really clear understanding of why your product exists, where you sit in the marketplace, and this enables you to focus on adding the right features for your customers and not getting too distracted. To this day, I've worked with more than 100 companies, including a few global brands. The most impressive marketing team that I've ever worked with is 3 physiotherapists. They had no background in marketing whatsoever. They started a mailing list from there at physiotherapy school. They read all of the latest clinical studies on physiotherapy, created actionable insights, turned this into a marketing list, and then turned that into a SaaS product that is like a Netflix for physiotherapists. You pay a monthly subscription, you get access to 30-minute videos that show you the latest research. These guys are doing, they've got a 4.7 Trustpilot score, they're doing 7 figures ARR, and every single quarter, they send out 2 surveys. One survey is to their mailing list of more than 100,000 physiotherapists who don't use their product, finding out what the biggest challenges what their biggest challenges are as physiotherapists. And they also survey their existing customers to find out the pain points and frustrations and the wins they've had using their product. They do this every single quarter, and this feeds into not just their marketing, but their product development. And this has enabled them to launch 2 to 3 back-to-back successful products with no fails. So what I'm trying to do at the moment with my customers is shift towards having a centralized customer research process. One of the biggest challenges I have is that when I'm hired by a marketing team, and we talk to the rest of the business, and we find out that the product team ran a survey 2 months ago. The intel they looked for wasn't relevant to our activities, but they're now worried about getting survey fatigue. They're worried that we can't actually interview their customers again. Whereas if we go out and we speak to the department heads for sales, marketing, product, work out what would the ideal customer intelligence be for us to capture on a quarterly or a biannual basis, let's pull together a centralized customer survey, run it from the center of a business, and feedback and report that intelligence to every other area of the business in turn. So this is a model I'm trying to push at the moment. Anyone I've seen who've tried this centralized customer research process has had a significant improvement in their marketing, but also their product roadmap as well. So summaries from this are: don't blindly copy the marketing and messaging from global brands. You're much better off looking at high growth startups that are maybe 1 or 2 rungs above you than just copying Stripe and Apple. The messaging strategies they use are probably completely irrelevant to your business. I would recommend going back, and if you haven't done this already, look at your product features. Think about the abilities that each feature gives your customer, then look at the benefits. And if you're a startup, you probably want to lead by talking about the abilities that you give your customers, but use the features to prove it and the benefits to enhance the angles of your marketing as well. Don't write benefit-focused and outcome-focused headlines. People need to understand what kind of problem you solve, what the status quo is in the market, and how you improve upon that. Don't rely on customer personas. Build customer research into your business. And if you're a very early startup and you don't have a lot of customers to interview, look at doing review scraping. Scrape reviews from G2, Capterra, other review platforms. Find out the things about big players in your space that piss people off, and present your startup as being the solution to those problems. You don't have to have feature parity with a major business. You just have to find a way to solve the problems that are frustrating their customers, and that can help you build a viable startup. If you're interested in taking any of this further, I recently launched Copybase, which is a Figma homepage kit. It contains a lot of blocks and principles that myself and several other CRO consultants have used for putting together homepages. There's a 30% discount code. There's a QR code on my next page. And if you'd like to get in contact with me, feel free to connect on LinkedIn or ask me any questions at this conference or afterwards about starting from marketing for startups. And if you have any questions now, I'll be happy to take them. Cool.
Sorry, I made that really inconvenient by sitting as far away from the microphone as possible. Really enjoyed the point you made about bringing content teams together to try and centralize that intelligence, not work in silos. We at Paddle have just started to build what we call a content committee. I'm not sure if that's something that you have expertise in. It's something I'm trying to lead, trying to bring more people from less traditional go-to-market roles like product marketing, product leaders, etc. We've got a lot of different ways of working that we're seeing are being really popular use cases, but are maybe taking away from our traditional ways of communicating that. Do you have any lessons from creating content committees, ways of working, things that we could take away to maybe improve what we're doing?
Yeah, I haven't used the expression content committee, but I've certainly seen startups who've built, in particular, case studies as being a centralized process where they've pulled in advice and help from other arms of a business. I'd actually recommend one of my competitors here, a guy called Joel Kletke. Joel's a really high-level copywriter. He started up Case Study Buddy. You might have seen Case Study Buddy around. They've done a really good job of not just promoting case studies and building them for companies, but also they pump out a lot of content about helping companies to produce case studies and involving the rest of the business too. I'd probably point you to his content. He's a real expert at that. Cool. Yep.
What are like the best results you've seen with your client in terms of increasing the number of visitors or improving conversion rate when you change the copy?
Yeah, so it's hard to answer that because typically smaller companies, you get more impressive numbers, whereas bigger companies, you've probably got a higher net figure but a smaller percentage-based increase.
Okay, smaller ones then.
Anow.com, based in North America, I doubled their product demos. They initially, I shouldn't say this publicly, they initially went live with a new pricing strategy. So that's one lesson there is don't induce multiple variables. They went live with their new copy. We thought the conversions had halved because they'd doubled their prices. So we quickly reverted the prices back to their normal level and we actually ended up doubling their product demos and sales.
Nice, thanks.
Cool.
One more. When you've written something, you've done your research, you've written it, you read it, what do you ask yourself to kind of get to that point where you think this is good enough?
I think the irony is you'll never get to that point. There's one of my favorite producers is a guy called Nicolay. He's a hip hop producer, and he said he's been nominated for a few Grammys. He said that once he's finished making an album, he can't listen to it for 9 to 12 months afterwards because he's so sick of hearing all the individual loops. And I think as a creative person, you'll never get to that point. You might feel good once you've done it. You probably I normally hate my work for a while afterwards when I come back to it 6 months later and love it. I rely on getting feedback from other copywriters that I'm friends with and my client. But you'll never get to it. The better you get, the more kind of you worry, and there's always this bar above where you're at. And that never stops. I don't know any copywriters who actually feel amazing about their work, if I'm honest. Yep.
How do you deal with the internal marketing teams who consider it as a competitor at one point?
Fighting? No, it's tough. I mean, you have to sort of establish the hierarchy there, and you think about, who's hiring you, what person's hired you in the first place. Normally, I like to establish the structure very early on. Who's the person you're engaging with at that particular company? Making sure they're your key point of contact, making it clear you don't expect to get feedback from every single person in the company. They should go through that key point of contact. The last thing you want is a Google Doc. I mean, I work in Figma now, but Figma or Google Doc going live and being peppered with hundreds of comments from tens of people. So making sure you understand this is your key point of contact of a company. And yeah, all of the feedback should go through them and not just be a complete free-for-all. The biggest issue is when you start working with external design teams. So I often get hired in, here's the design team, here's me. And the design team don't like the fact that I'm hired in over their copywriter. And I have to make sure I brief my client in advance and say what's going to happen is the design team will come in. They're going to tell you to strip out the pain points. They're going to tell you there are too many customer quotes. They want something slick and cool that feels really, I don't know, throw in your language. I basically brief my client in advance as to the problems that design teams have. And then when that stuff inevitably happens, they recognize it and they say, no, we're following the copywriter. I think one of the most important things is understanding that a page should be based around a content architecture. The more I use that language, content architecture, the more design teams tend to back off and understand that the copy leads and the design follows. Cool.
Super. Thank you, Alex.
No worries, thank you.
One applause for Alex.